Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of Q&A Corner. My name is Andrew, if you haven't dropped by Q&A Corner before, and I am so excited to see all of you amazing viewers that have decided to drop by our Twitch stream today, particularly our CodeWords digital storytellers who are here for a chance to learn what digital storytelling looks like in the world of somebody working in the technology industry. So on today's stream, again, this is a Q&A Corner special stream, so if you've never heard of Q&A Corners before, these are interactive industry interviews, and the interactivity comes from you, our amazing guests in the stream chat. So you are able to throw questions that we will answer live on stream. You can also send us questions if you're a CodeWords digital storyteller over in the Google Classroom on that Google form, and we will be here to answer those throughout the stream. So I had muted Christian. As I said, the only time that I will mute him in the entire stream, but I'm just going to bring you full screen, Christian. There we go. Oh, and you have disappeared completely off the stream because that's how technology works. Whenever you try and do something that you want to happen, it never works. This happens at every single stream too. Give me 1 second. All right. And let's go there. And then let's go back to there. There we go. You have appeared again. How's it going, Christian? I'm not doing too bad at all. I just want to see if your audio is working again. Can you say something, anything? I can, but I can't hear you on stream. I'm just going to see what's going on there. So desktop audio. It's because it's set to the wrong output. I bet you that you're there now. Try.
Hello, testing.
There
Hello,
we
Andrew.
go. Now you exist. You are
Beautiful.
there live on stream.
Glad to hear it. I was worried there for a second.
Awesome, and we've got some viewers. So Sixers fan, I gotta say, welcome back, Sixers fan. Sixers fan is our most loyal High Tech U stream subscriber. And then Baraka, welcome Baraka. Super excited to see you. And yeah, it's gonna be such a great day. So Christian, how? So we just had a long weekend here in Canada. How did you spend your long weekend to get us started?
Oh, good question. Let me think. I generally just was spending a lot of time outside. I actually had my first social interaction with somebody who was visiting Victoria. I haven't seen this person in 10 years. It felt very weird to see this person outside and actually be like face to face with people. So it was a bit of a milestone for me.
I love that. Yeah, I've been invited to a few large events and I haven't quite gotten there yet. I don't have my second shot, so I'm on my way, but not quite there yet. So amazing. Well, and I'm super excited. Thank you so much, Christian, for agreeing to come on the stream today. We've got some amazing digital storytellers that have been working for the past month on some Twine stories. And so this is kind of one of their first opportunities to meet somebody, I think that kind of fits your unique profile, which I'll ask you about in just a second, of not only somebody that's in the world of software and technology, but also is like a super avid reader and writer. So maybe that's the place to get us started today while I do some background testing and things like that, is just maybe tell us a little bit about your story. How did you end up from kind of where you were? I sense a slightly English accent. And then I'm just gonna fix some lag stuff on our end that I'm just getting identified in the meantime. So yeah, take it away, and I'm gonna mute myself.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, you did identify an accent. I don't feel like I have an accent anymore, but people tell me I do. I'm not sure what you think about that. But yeah, I'm originally from the UK, so I moved about 10 years ago. But back in the UK, let's maybe go back to high school. So back in high school, we call it secondary school. But I was generally quite interested in a lot of sort of drama, as we called it. So lots of performing, and I was in a lot of school plays and a lot of musicals that we did. That was kind of a mild passion of mine, but I was also getting into a bit of website design. I did a few little websites on Dreamweaver at the time, and then did some for some companies. It was very strange to kind of build something as like a teenager that actually was going to be used by little organizations in my little town in southern England. But then after school, I still wasn't sure what I wanted to be doing, so I went to college. I'm not sure how that tracks back to the school system here, but generally there I did a bit of a mix of what was called performance studies and computer science and technology stuff. And I still wasn't quite sure, but I was still doing a little bit of both. And then before I went to university, I just decided to go all in on the computer science. But I split my time with that and maths, as we call it. Some people say math, of course. I always struggle with all these ones, but yeah, so I did a nice mix of the two. So I got a Master's of Science in the end, focusing on actually cryptography, which is kind of a fun sort of intersection between math and computer science, having codes and unbreakable codes and how to break them. So that's sort of my history there. And then since school, I've worked for a few companies, but primarily we've been building applications to help people explore data in many ways. So it's a very visual sort of world I'm in. And in fact, when you approached me about maybe talking on this, it seemed like a logical best fit because I do a lot of storytelling. I'm actually partly in sales nowadays. So a lot of my presentations are very much telling a story about how technology can be used to, in turn, tell a story about investigations or some sort of overriding data story.
Amazing. So Christian, I am noticing some like crazy lag on your end. You are literally doing this super weird thing right now, and I'm not quite sure what's causing it. So I'm just going to shut down the stream, change a couple settings.
Okay.
Do you want to just turn off your video and turn it back on? And for our viewers, we'll be back in just a minute with the CodeWords stream. So just hang tight. We'll be back in just a minute.
Sure.
Let's get my audio on. All right, so I think we're back for all of our viewers. Thank you so much for that introduction as well, Christian. That was amazing. As I was like slowly trying to figure out what the chaos was that was going on our end.
Technology, eh?
Oh, gotta love it. I love that we're on a technology live stream too, and of course, it's when these things go wrong. So yeah, I'm as we kind of get this, just for our viewers that are on the other end, before we kind of jump into the rest of the interview, if you can just let us know if it seems less laggy, if the audio's better, just like let us know how things are doing on your end now. I'm here on Twitch as well, just checking to see how things are going, and yeah, just give us a heads up about how the quality is as we vamp a little bit, just about life and all the rest of this stuff. So. Oh, I see it back on there. Go ahead.
How was your weekend?
It was okay. It was my in-laws are coming in from out of town, so it was a lot of
nice.
prep for that. But yeah, ooh, look at that. We are doing so much better. Nice. There we go. We figured it out. It was take 2 was what was going to work for this. There we go. Awesome. So I think, do we have our folks back yet? Sixers fan, Berica, are you back? Are you with us? Are you here? All right, maybe not. But either way, we're gonna kind of keep jumping into our conversation, and then as we get people back on, we should be good to go. And I see we got some folks that are popping back on the stream now, so that's super exciting. I love tech issues when you're doing these things. So really today is all about exploring that connection, like you kind of said in that intro, of like what that world of like storytelling and writing looks like in the world of technology. And so I know I sent a bunch of questions to you beforehand that you could have a chance to answer, but I'm kind of curious, like, which came, and I know you kind of introduced this, but like kind of which of these things, when you were deciding where your career was going to go, from that art side to the technology side, what was it that ultimately pushed you towards like getting into the technology industry as a career?
Good question. I think something that's followed my career and since I was at school and before was definitely solving problems and finding solutions, right? And so I think that's a lot more obvious in some ways. Like there's very much a sort of a line from A to B or A to Z or whatever with computers, and actually, getting to a point where somebody says, yes, this is good, and it is solving some problem for me, and it's saving this amount of time, right? The more creative stuff I loved, of course, but once there was a bit of an anticlimax once you perform something and then you just kind of on to the next thing, right? So it's nice to kind of create something that is used by people, and again, getting that nice feedback loop. So it was a hard decision, but I think a lot of that satisfaction came through, and it was a good path to take.
Nice. So let me just let me then kind of say, for those people that are early in their career now, is there a way, if they're sort of on the storytelling side, that they are able to maybe do some of that same kind of problem solving? Or do you think that early in your career, like where these a lot of the students that we have now are, is kind of the better time to say like, okay, I enjoy writing, but I want to go into this technology area? Like, which do you think is the appropriate starting place in a career, or do you have an opinion on that, I guess?
Yeah, I guess it feels like there's no wrong way to start, right? I think if you can find a problem, or you can find at least a very small piece of technology that you enjoy using, or just a website creator or something that you feel like putting something out there in the world, I think that's a great start, right? And I think it's important to remember that not everything needs that purpose. So not everything. I do a lot of storytelling in my job, but not everything that you do in terms of writing needs the same I am solving a problem as I just talked about. Sometimes it could just be writing just for yourself, or just for an audience of one. Maybe you're writing a letter to someone. So yeah, I think there's a kind of lots of different variants of storytelling. I think, and in the same way, there's a lot of variants when it comes to technology. So I think obviously making a website is such a compelling, very quick thing to do nowadays. It's very simple to kind of get started with another number of tools, but it doesn't have to take that form.
Fair enough. Do you want to just switch your video off and on again, because it's doing this weird thing that you'll catch on the VOD afterwards. But I bet you when you come back on, it's going to be fine. Yeah,
Very
so you're
strange.
fine. It's anyways the joys of technology. I'm sure it's also partially to do
No,
with the
it's fine. Yeah,
screens.
sure. I'm worried it's
Okay.
something I'm doing,
No, no,
or,
no. I
or,
don't.
or maybe I'm just speaking like that.
No, exactly. There. Yeah, I was gonna say maybe this is a thing that's actually happening, and I will be surprised later. Okay, so I mean, you talk about how storytelling impacts your work, and it's a big part of that. Like, so for those people that are out there, like, yeah, everybody says that storytelling impacts kind of the stuff that they do. So could you like give an example of what that looks like in your role, and maybe I guess kind of explaining what that role is in like a day-to-day piece? So what does it mean to
Yeah.
be a technical sales leader at a technology company?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess fundamentally, data is good, and everyone talks about how data is the next big thing. And, we have so much data around us, and, metadata, people talk about how metadata is even more important than just data because it tells you about the data itself. And a lot of that stuff is very true, but it's very hard to cut through that and find the needle in the haystack, what you're looking for. So a lot of my roles have always been working with technology to help find those needles. And so, when you say I can solve your problems, I can push something through a pipeline, and I can get some results at the end that is very helpful. Um, People don't really, people struggle to see how that will actually look, and it's hard to really persuade people that that's going to help them until there is a story associated with it. So this is quite popular in a lot of product design and product management sort of situations where people are saying, "What is my user looking for? How can I help them to do that?" So I kind of do that a lot when I'm talking to various customers across different domains. So what I do is a lot of graph visualization, which is a type of data visualization. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, it's kind of like, you probably know a Venn diagram where like there would be two circles, and one circle would say, I don't know, people like peanut butter, and the other circle would be like people who like jelly or whatever. And then in the middle, there may be a little intersection of those people, and the people that exist in the middle like both of those things. What I do is visualization of things like that, but on a much larger scale. So lots of intersecting circles and lots of different connections between people. So it's kind of like visualizing, for example, I don't know, followers on TikTok, the people you follow, and the people who you are followed by. These could be arranged in a sort of elaborate Venn diagram to help you drill into what exactly is going on in your influence circle, and what's going on there. So that's kind of like not really a domain that I'm in, but when we come to things like supply chain, fraud, finding fraud in reviews on websites, we don't want to go on a website and see all these reviews that are fake. We want to be able to identify ones that maybe aren't quite as real as they look. So these are these sorts of stories that I help people with, and I help them have a flow from beginning to end, so they can ask a question and they get to the end and say, yes, this is clearly a fraudulent review. I don't want to put this on my website. Does that kind of make sense? So it's kind of covering a lot of different domains with storytelling, and really solving solutions by asking, what are people looking for, and how can I get results out of data in a very visual way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like I feel maybe sometimes when people think about storytelling, they definitely do think about like writing something down, and it's all about sort of like, can you tell a story that way? But I think so much now it's also about, can you tell a story through kind of the images and the graphs and those kind of things. I heard, I was listening to the CBC yesterday, and they were talking about graphic novels and how these have become like a really impactful, powerful medium for communicating complex topics. And when you said that, that's immediately what pops into my head, is like, this is kind of like the graphic novel equivalent of sort of data analytics, right?
Totally, yeah. And it's funny, right? You know, pictures, 1,000 words, right? I think interactive pictures on the web and like interactive articles, you know, it's more than 1,000, right? Because there's a sort of it's a self-guided story, right? You're following an article and you're understanding the data points as they kind of whiz in and out. We have a term in the industry called scrolly telling, where you're kind of scrolling down and things are telling you a story as you go. And these things are very compelling, and you can get data in front of people who maybe aren't interested in looking at tables and even writing, even just text. You know, it brings it to life.
Absolutely. And you know, there's a company that we work with at High Tech U that's done a shift in their model, and so they're called Engage Lively, and their original platform was sort of like a visual sort of JavaScript based tool for building out the same kind of things you're talking about. So you have a data set, you need to show it to a customer in a really interactive, fun way. And so this is a way to do that. And they've since kind of gone a little bit even further, and now they're integrating it within Jupyter Notebooks. And if you don't know what Jupyter Notebooks are out there, they're a really awesome, amazing software that allows for you to do some cool things in the world of data analytics and machine learning. But also if you're just looking to learn, say, like Python, it's a really cool interactive way to do that. But they've done this, and I got a demo the other day from their CEO, and so much of what you're talking about now, when I saw the visualizations that he'd created in that interactive piece, I was like, wow, this is so much more impactful than if you showed me that spreadsheet, or even if you showed me a couple of just like static graphs that are not able to be interacted with.
And it's sort of like a multi-level thing as well, because it's also, if you were inheriting that notebook, if you received it from someone and you're supposed to run with it and work with it, you know, it's self-documenting. It tells you exactly how it's been built as well. So these technologies are very empowering, because it means anyone can kind of see the behind the scenes and either look at it in its first pass or even start editing it. So yeah, notebooks are amazing.
Absolutely. So welcome back to some of our viewers that were here for our first technical issues. So Berica, me and Belle, if you want to throw just in the chat, let us know how the quality is this time around. Is it laggy for you? Is the audio good? Do we need more volume, less volume? Are we too bright? Are we too dim? Ah, there we go. We're back. Berica says we are doing great. So I do have a question actually that popped into our chat, and so it's a little bit less related to storytelling, but for somebody that is in the world of computer science, and I know this is a broad question, and I'm glad you're the one that has to answer it. What are the kinds of jobs you can get with a background like yours in computer science? Like, where does that world take you?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, when I started out, I was mainly a developer. So I was a particular type of developer, though, where I wasn't necessarily starting things from scratch. I was doing a lot of data analytics. So using what are now a relatively old programming language to kind of dig into data in a very dry sort of, this is my data set, and it's going to take a long time to run jobs overnight so I can do some processing and things like that. So my background is definitely from that developer side of things. And then I started to work with the customers who are ultimately using the sort of outputs that we're creating. And then I kind of pivoted a little bit to the sales side with still some development nowadays. So I can speak to that a lot. That's my background. And that was quite nice to kind of drill into the data kind of in a good business context. But really, I mean, in my view, you know, your degree is really just a springboard to whatever you want to be doing. And I think computer science and related fields. Oh, my video. Wow, look at that. I think computer science and related fields very much is about, more about thinking and how you approach problems and how you solve problems. And they may not be with you touching a keyboard. They could be very much almost leading into sort of managerial, sort of helping other people to achieve what they're doing. So, you know, you say it's a broad question. There's a lot of answers there. I think you could even go into things like teaching. You know, I think you're starting to have those skill sets where you're thinking about problem solving, and those problems can take so many different forms.
Yeah, and I feel like there's still this kind of perception that if you want to get into a computer science field, you have to be really math focused and like math forward. So where do you think math fits into that play then, if it's not sort of the core piece?
It's funny, yeah. I mean, I mentioned earlier I have I guess a degree, half degree in maths, and I I honestly, I wasn't very good at it. And I always appreciated it, and I always read about it, and I always liked it from the outside, but I was never very good at actually writing these things, right? So I wouldn't say it's a definite requirement. And I think nowadays I work with a lot of people, and I've met a lot of people who don't have that engineering background, and have still gone into a technology career and are very, very successful. And I think bringing that awareness and that experience from other domains works just as well in many ways. Of course, you're going to get credit for knowing, why you shouldn't use a bubble sort or something. But when it comes down to it, having at least some comprehension of making informed decisions about technology, or making informed decisions about anything, I think is good enough.
Absolutely. Okay, so now let's switch gears a little bit. So we've talked a little bit about the tech stuff and a little bit about how storytelling applies to tech, but technology is not your entire world. Well, it kind of is, but on the other side of it, in the stuff that you do every day, you publish a newsletter, you have a personal blog. Where did those fall within kind of your passions? Like which came first? You were doing the technical stuff and you were like, okay, I should do writing about this, or was it like, I really want to write and this technical thing is kind of what I know right now, and so I'm going to do that?
Yeah, it's a funny question. And I guess when you ask it like that, I guess on reflection, it was very much a pandemic thing. I think that, like a lot of people, I found myself with a lot of time inside and a lot of time thinking about what skills I could pick up, or try and improve. And I thought I'd start writing, and see if I can kind of improve my writing. Basically, I thought, well, this isn't something I do. I don't force myself to write that much. And I feel like at least if I start trying it, then maybe I can get a feel for whether it's something I'd like to do. So I've always been interested in, as I kind of alluded to, like describing and explaining complicated topics, and I think there's a lot of interesting stories to tell about what I do, and the domain I'm in for network and graph visualization. So I kind of wanted to see whether I could come up with some way of talking about that in a way that was a little different from my work, but at least with this regularity, basically, to start building up a base of people who receive my emails with these words that I was just typing out frantically every other week, right? So yeah, it was kind of just I thought I'd give it a go, and I'm still doing it, and it's kind of fun to have a little project that you're kind of growing, and I think newsletters are very popular nowadays, like email newsletters, and I think it's a really nice way of having a good feedback loop. So you write something, and then people will respond to you, and they'll get used to the way you write and how often you release, and I really like that sort of cycle where I can write something and then immediately get responses where maybe I've said something that's wrong, or they don't agree with, or links that I wasn't aware of. It's a very a communal way of writing.
But I'm just gonna pull up the that view there. I think everybody should be able to see it. Oh no, you can't, because I need to go and switch over to there. There we go. So this is Source Target. For anybody out there that's interested, sourcetarget.email. If you're interested in like what does Christian write and what is this newsletter all about, or if you're really interested in graphs, then this is your place to go. So like what are the kind of things that they can like expect to see from you if they do subscribe to this?
And actually, you're putting this up, and I think this is also part of my intent. I wanted to get a feel for what it's like to market and create something like this and put it out there on the web, right? So, or I look at this now and I'm curious whether I can improve it. It's one of those like little side project things. But I write about how networks kind of are everywhere really in our lives, and there's some examples there. So on the left-hand side, that is a map of people moving between provinces in Canada.
Oh, this
so
one
using data from StatsCan to say when people are moving across the country, and I was curious to see whether more people were moving to or from BC, because I moved to BC a few years ago. I was curious whether that trend was continuing. Bottom right there, that's all the directors and actors and the characters in Studio Ghibli movies. I don't know if you're a fan, Andrew.
I definitely I watched Spirited Away like 15 years ago, and it's like the only real exposure that I've had to Ghibli film. So I feel like I need to get further into it, especially now that anime is making a resurgence.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And so that was a fun experiment where I was scraping from the Studio Ghibli wiki and seeing if I could build up a network or a galaxy, so to speak, of all the voice actors and the characters in that. And yeah, just because it's up there finally on the top right, you may have heard of NFTs recently, or cryptography, or crypto stuff. So that is one of the oldest NFTs was the little pixelated punks, as they're called, and they're worth a lot of money nowadays. And then I think there's 10,000 of them, and I plotted them all out with their shared characteristics. So looking at commonality between them. Some of them don't have any features at all. They're just completely bald. Others have things like pipes, and it was fun to kind of map that out and see that. I don't think anyone has really ever mapped those out all together in a view like that.
I love that. So it's funny. So let me just switch back over to here. So let's talk. I'd be interested in kind of exploring, because we're on NFTs. We're talking about storytelling and graphs and designs. So NFTs are if for those of you who don't know what NFTs are that are out there, NFT stands for non-fungible token. It's basically an application of a something called blockchain, and that is way too complex of a topic to get into on a live stream today. But one of the things that I have heard so much is that, particularly in the world of a lot of these complex technologies, it's so much about the way that the story is told, right? It's about convincing people and like explaining it in such a way. Have you seen that in sort of not only the role that you do in the tech world that you live, but also just being somebody in the tech world? Do you see these trends that become trendy just because they have really good storytellers behind them?
Yeah, I guess so. And there's a lot to talk about with NFTs, right? And I think the funny thing with those are you in tech, you'll often see things bubble up and you'll be aware of them. Like crypto kitties is a really popular one. And I remember years ago seeing those and just kind of laughing a bit and being like, oh, what are they, and then now, if I'd have just, spent $10 or whatever and bought one, it would have been life changing, right? So I think there's that side, which is the sort of, oh, look at me. Wow, that's such a strange video thing. There we go. I think the speculation aside, I think the technology is kind of fascinating in terms of, there's often a story around how the content itself is embedded inside the way the content is delivered, right? So I've seen a lot of artwork that is effectively a property of the chain itself embedded into the painting. So it's something that can't really be created elsewhere without that same sort of seed or same sort of starting point. And when the NFT boom really started recently, or when it really escalated recently, you see there's a lot of things popping up with this sort of aura around them, and like, oh, this is going to be a fantastic one. This is going to be just like this. It's just popping off, and part of the problem with the internet, of course, is it's very hard to see through that and see the stuff that is, maybe more buzz, and maybe there's some fake accounts, or there's some things that are kind of pushing it towards being more popular than it actually is. And you have to be wary. You see this stuff and you get carried away, and you think, well, maybe I should just go for it, but in reality, there's a lot to kind of read and feel comfortable. And I don't think anyone really gets to the bottom of exactly how comfortable they are with these things. And sometimes they just go for it and they're along for the ride.
So true. Wow, that like I veered away into like non-tech things, and then we've now gone back to NFTs. Like that's as fast of a pivot as you can possibly go. Okay, so that's amazing. Now there's another. So obviously you do newsletters, but that's not the only kind of writing you do. So you also have a blog as well, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah. That's kind of fallen out of. Sometimes I was writing my newsletter, and I was like, there's other things I want to be writing that aren't necessarily just about graph and network stuff. And also, there's just more interest nowadays in kind of owning your own data and kind of being in control of your own story in some ways. So the site doesn't look like much, right? But it's just my space that I own all the data. It's all just markdown files. I host it myself using some great tooling online. And I've built the website, even though it looks very rudimentary. It's a style that I've set. And it's just really nice to have your little corner of the internet where you can write. And I've been in this field for 10 years. I've been on the internet longer, and I've always been jealous of people who've had websites who you look back at the posts and they've been writing since 2007. It's like imagining having that commitment, right? So this is me, 2021. I'm starting out, and I want to have a bit of space for that. But the main reason that I have it is for the I like tracking my books, and there's good reads which is out there, but it's annoying to use and hard to dig into, and people are always telling you their opinions. But this is my site for my opinions, and no one needs to read it unless they really want to. So it's kind of nice to kind of be separate from that as well. So I've been tracking my books since mainly since the pandemic. Again, I've been reading a lot more, and it's nice to have a space for notes and just to kind of keep track and look back and see what I've read and remind myself.
I was gonna say, like, you're a prolific reader. Like, I'll be honest with you. I started reading during the pandemic as well, in a much bigger way, and I bought a bunch of books. But I don't come anywhere close to this number of books.
Bit embarrassing, really. A lot of those are audiobooks, so that's easier, right? You're walking around and you can speed them up and stuff.
I don't know, but you know what? At the same time, I feel like even like all of us watch so many. We watch Netflix and we watch these streaming shows, and there's something to be said for just like writing down what you thought about it, because so often you forget, like, oh, I didn't really like that show, or I really did like that book, or when you tell somebody like, here's what I loved about it, you're trying to remember back to like what the specific thing was. So I love this idea of kind of a blog to examine what these things are and what you liked and what you didn't.
Yeah, it's nice because I find myself always thinking about what other people think, and I feel like I never really honed my sort of critical muscles where I'm writing about what I think about something. So this is both a spot for stuff that jumped out to me that I want to track. This was an interesting book about interviewing people, which is kind of fascinating. It's kind of relevant for today, I guess. But so I can put both stuff that jumped out that I want to remember, because I always forget things, but then also just a few lines of just what I liked about it and whether I'd recommend it. Because a lot of these books are recommended by other people online. So, I want to return the favor and make a list of all the stuff I like.
Absolutely. And look at that. That was very apropos that I chose the one book, though. This was not planned, ladies and gentlemen. But I mean, I totally agree. I definitely find so many of these books that are recommended, particularly like I've been really into like entrepreneurship books recently. And so you get these kind of like classic, like lean startup recommendations and like Rework and all these other things. But I will put it on my shelf and then I will forget about it for probably the next 5 years after I read it. So why not?
It's kind of addictive, right? And I picked up Rework recently at a bookshop out of town, but nowadays I finish a book and then my hands are like, where's my next one? It's a good problem to have, really.
Absolutely. So, I mean, maybe just a brief conversation, because I'm just getting started in that. So for those of you who are out there that have never heard of Rework, this is kind of it's a bit of a controversial book right now, considering the folks that wrote it. There's been some major challenges with their company that you can look up if you're interested in that a little bit more. But the book Rework is actually kind of on every single like top seller list of like entrepreneurship books and way to do business. It hasn't made the list, obviously, but have you started to read it yet?
I haven't, no, and I flipped through it. It's on my to read, I guess. But yeah, I'm very interested in, because as you say, there's a lot of I guess a lot of discussions, and that recent news is interesting in hindsight for this book, I guess. But it's quite I don't know what's the word. It's not aggravating, but it's kind of in your face a bit, right? Like these things that are wrong, and sometimes it's nice to read that. Sometimes it's a bit abrasive, right?
Yeah.
But I'm excited to have a look.
Yeah, I definitely got to say, like, I read a book recently that's become like kind of my favorite book. That it's honestly, it's one of the best books that I've ever read. Nice. It's called Lost and Founder.
Okay.
And it's written by a founder out of Seattle. Built a company that was all focused around SEO, but he tells it through the lens of sort of, I'm going to tell you my life story, and at certain points within here, I'm also going to teach you things. So I learned all about the venture capital model, and I learned all about sort of like how to build a business that's a consultancy into this. And it's just like, it's this very kind introduction to a lot of these concepts, where even just sort of being I think I'm like 10 minutes into the audiobook of Rework, and all that I have heard so far is, you think this and you are absolutely wrong, you need to do it this other way. And I'm contrasting these two books already as like, wow, this one was done in this really sort of it focused on the story. I think that was the big thing, is like you're teaching, but you're teaching through the storytelling process.
Yeah, that's great.
Very impactful.
One of the recent books, actually, I just finished audiobook, was Never Split the Difference, which is quite a famous one now about negotiation. And it's like an ex-FBI negotiator and the stuff he learned. And it's all about how it may not sound like it's relevant to your day-to-day, like buying a car instead of like, negotiating for hostage recuperation or whatever. But that was a great example of that, where it was interleaved with some good stories along the way that really helped you understand why he was telling you to do certain things. And I was surprised how much I enjoyed it. It was good. And then for my sales part of my role, I definitely was helpful to kind of, I guess, confirm some of the things I do and some of the things I shouldn't be doing in sales negotiations.
I love that. So yeah, if people are interested in checking, I need to switch over to the other screen. If people are interested in checking out Christian's blog, and you're interested in finding out some of these book recommendations, or even like if they're interested in finding out like how they can create their own, is this an open source kind of like repo on your GitHub or?
Yeah, well, it's not actually public. I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm kind of sensitive about sharing my code, and I really shouldn't be. I'm just always, it's really hard to kind of forget, or it's really hard not to feel very worried that people are going to spot all the mistakes you've made. And I'm getting out of that now. And so I will start to release these things publicly. But yeah, I'm using a really nice little framework called Eleventy. You may have heard of the Jam Stack, which is a popular saying nowadays,
Yep.
which is actually, what even does it stand for? I should know this. I think my mind's just gone blank.
It's Java. Is it JavaScript? It's not a
And markup.
And markup. Yeah, I think that's what it is.
So this site actually has zero JavaScript. It is built and then it just exists on a server, which is kind of like I used to write code like 20 years ago, right? So it's kind of a funny one. But it's really nice because you just point at your files and they're marked down. So it just looks like text basically. And then it just builds it into a little website. And I use Netlify, which is very popular, but GitHub Pages are also an easy way to do this. And builds for this website, if they can be called that, they take 8 seconds. So it's I build it, I put new, I create new GitHub issues, and they create pages, and they just post it onto the site. So it's sort of like creating my own WordPress or creating my own Goodreads, but I've learned a lot from doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's funny, I know you were talking about like creating your first website before. The first website that I ever designed was in this really fun software called Zara Web Designer, which nobody's probably ever heard of. It's like this little it's not a rinky-dink company, but it was like Corral, which used to, for those of you who are out there, I just aged myself, but Christian, you might remember Corral WordPerfect. Did you ever use that?
Oh yeah, sure.
But like this was the software, and they created this sort of like sub company, and I remember we hired brought a volunteer on board of the nonprofit that I was working with, and she was a software developer, and she looked at this code and it compiled to just garbage. Like it looked good, but it compiled to garbage. And so like where I think for those of you who are out there that are watching this stream, what's amazing about Markdown is like exactly like Christian said, you can literally download all of this entire thing and like basically read it on most modern web browsers as well. So you don't even need it to be on a website if you don't want it to be.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, no, I've been thinking I should do some sort of course or something to kind of introduce people to it, because it's a really nice way of learning about technology, kind of starting from real basics, but creating something that's really, really sort of, I don't know. It's nice to see all these books lining up. So it's nice to see the website being built like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know, for those of you who are out there that are like, I don't know how to like host a website, like Christian said, like Netlify, huge GitHub Pages is kind of a game changer, especially for students. You can basically throw up a website in 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Which is just incredible.
Sort of like a golden age nowadays or something. We're definitely, you know, anyone who wants to publish anything can really.
Yeah, I do remember the days. I still love shared hosting, but I remember the days when that was all that you could do was get your cPanel up there and then hope that you could do things. And now we really are in the golden age of kind of getting your own content out there. So I love that. All right, so then we're talking about books right now, and so I guess this is a dangerous question for a bibliophile, but what is your favorite book right now?
Oh, I should have known you were going to ask me this. Right now, I feel like there's one of the benefits of the internet is that if you get a recommendation from somebody that you kind of feel aligned with, you know it's going to be a good one. And I think there's been a few of those recently where they're kind of knocking it out of the park. And I feel like I'm going to have to find someone who's going to recommend a bad book so I can understand what it's like to find a book you don't like. But the one that sticks in my mind recently is called The Ministry for the Future. And I'm really excited because it's an author who has been writing for like 30, 40 years about science fiction. And I've only recently rediscovered science fiction. It was something I kind of forgot about for a bit, and now I'm like reading as much as I can. But it's a really interesting book about climate change, but through a very positive lens, sort of talking about the negative stuff that will happen, but kind of a speculative future story about how the world will basically rally around, and there'll be a sort of a government sort of pseudo agency kind of helping people to look after people of the future and animals of the future. And so I found it a really helpful way of thinking about climate change, about what we can do about it, rather than some of the stuff that's a bit more negative. And it's hard not to be negative about it. But yeah, so I really enjoyed it. And it did a lot of stuff where it interleaved sort of sometimes very dry sort of non-fiction elements, talking about like glaciers and things. And you're like, why am I reading this? And then it just turns into this beautiful story about how we can really work with this in the future. So yeah, that stands out to me. I also, more of a kind of pure fiction, I read a book called how much of these hills is gold, and it was really good. It was kind of about a family in the American gold rush, Chinese American family, and it was just a beautiful story. I really recommended that. I recommended it to a few people and they liked it as well. But yeah, it's got this kind of magical realism to it, but very much a sort of newcomer story, but with a sort of Western tinge. I really enjoyed it.
I love that.
I'm curious though, Andrew, is there one that comes to mind for you, a favorite book?
So
maybe not recent?
there is a book that so Lost and Founder, definitely my favorite on that side.
Of course.
In terms of other books, like probably my favorite book of all time is by a Canadian author, or sorry, yeah, I think he's Canadian, but originally from the UK. But he wrote a book called Cheers, A History of Beer in Canada. And so it's his story of like exploring the history of sort of like the brewing industry in Canada, but through kind of this mix of personal history, because he's like a beer sommelier and kind of travels everywhere and writes books on it, but also through like these sort of fun little explorations of like I'm not even sure what kind of the vignettes, I guess, but it's just this really not even the subject matter. It could be written about like chocolate, it could be written about teddy bears, like he inserts humor in the right way to just kind of make it this really fun book. And that's kind of what I look for in any of the books that I read now, is like I'm looking for authenticity from the authors in a really big way, and that's what I find really attractive. But definitely, like, if you're not obviously we got a lot of high school students on this stream, probably a little bit not interesting to you, but definitely the Lost and Founder book, like I got it on audiobook and loved it so much that I bought a hard copy of it just so that I could have it, so that if I ever lose the audio. But amazing book, like so good. I followed him on Twitter, and he like tweeted back at me, so it was like I was kind of fanboying out on it, and it was quite amazing.
Nice.
Okay, so then kind of going to the other side. So this is obviously CodeWords. So this is about not just writing. It's about sort of writing interactive fiction. So choose your own adventure stories. What's been your experience, just like either as a creator or as a consumer of like this kind of like interactive fiction? Like, where does that fit within your life as either a developer or a reader?
I guess most recently, I'm not sure if anyone would have watched it at this level, but the Netflix show, or the few of them, of course, with the Bandersnatch, was it, and some other shows they had. That was reminding me how good interactive fiction can be, where you're really engrossed in it, right? You feel that you're really driving the story in a way that isn't necessarily the case with a sort of traditional book. And it made me think about all the Goosebumps I read as a kid, like with like I remember Goosebumps was really surprising to me because it was probably the first book I read that was suddenly very much like trying to scare you. And I think I was very not ready for that, you know? So then to be also in control, I think it was just very, very disorienting for me to have that experience with a book. So I think it can kind of surpass a lot of the ways that you expect books and TV to work when you actually work with it in an interactive sense. But then again, showing my age, I used to play a game called Hugo's House of Horrors, and you should look it up. And it's the 8-bit sort of visuals, and it was very much sort of typing in to describe what you should be doing. And I remember spending hours trying to work out the exact sort of thing to type to get the right part of the story that you're looking for. I think the one that always sticks in my mind is that there's a pumpkin outside when you start the game, and it says, this might be a spoiler, so I'm sorry for a 30-year-old spoiler, but it says you don't have a key to the house, so what do you do? And the answer is to open the pumpkin. And I was always amazed, like, open the pumpkin? Who opens a pumpkin? Like, you mean go inside the pumpkin? But it never accepted any of that. So it's I know it's really hard to make a kind of compelling interactive story, there can be things, it's kind of like a graph, like I was talking about earlier, where things start to really spread out and you kind of have these little legs of stuff that you can't connect back, or you need to understand whether you have a sort of loop in the game. But yeah, that's been my exposure in the past, and I've been really interested in trying out Twine, although it's been a little while since I took a look at it. Yeah, nice. Yeah, great. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is a tree right now, right? So as you go from the top to the bottom, you kind of follow along, and a tree means that it hasn't got any loops back to itself, so you can't go back to the top. But I know if you were to start drawing lines back from certain groups, if maybe you want to kick someone out in the game and say, no, you're going to go back to this level or this position, then it's more of a directed sort of cycle of a graph, and it's amazing how complicated these things can get and how hard they can be to kind of, as you say, there's a lot of theory behind them, because you could create a game that no one could ever solve or get to the end of. So it is a very in-depth thing to be working on.
I'm realizing that I was muted that entire time.
Oh no.
Sorry, Verica. That's good. It's all right. You didn't really need to hear me at all. That was way more about Christian anyways. I was just saying that was Twine. And if you're wondering about what you're learning, you just learned graph theory. So I'm glad to know that Christian and I were having a little bit of a back and forth there. And you could only hear half the conversation. I'd love it. Awesome. So, let me see. I had some other questions. Ooh. All right. So, so I asked favorite book, and kind of favorite choose your own adventure. Have you created games before? Like, is that something that you've done in your software development life?
I haven't, like, for work, unfortunately. I do a lot of storyboarding and a lot of demo design where, there's this step, it goes to this step, and it's not as exciting as sort of talking about, interesting stories about dragons or whatever that I might actually want to write about. I think about it a fair bit though. I think about what a good game would be, and I'm amazed by how much is out there in terms of games nowadays, and a lot of storytelling element games, right, where you're very textual in many ways. It's very much about what's written on the screen rather than sort of attacking and slashing and things. So yeah, I'm kind of in many ways overwhelmed by a lot of the indie games that are out there that do it so well. But I know there's a lot of studios in Victoria that build games, and I'd love to do it one day, but it's not necessarily something I focus on. But as I say, it is interesting what comes out when I do create stories for customers and think about how they want to be using software. It is, there's a lot of elements there that are very, I think, applicable to building a more interactive game. And what is being on the computer apart from just lots of games, moving things around the screen and having windows and typing into boxes. It's just another game.
It's so true. And it's funny, like nothing is ever new anymore. I downloaded, I got a free trial of Apple games the other day, and they hired somebody to remake Oregon Trail.
Oh wow, yeah.
And it's like graphically fun, but it wasn't quite the same. There's something to be said about like kind of poor graphics where it's really more about the story and the things that you read. I think that there's something that's lost when you move into a lot of these kind of like graphical elements that you lose. And I think that kind of goes to like the difference between a movie and a book, right? In the book, definitely. And even in the interactive stories, like you create the characters in your mind. Like until I saw Harry Potter in theaters when I was a kid, I had a very specific view of what Harry looked like. And then after I saw it, I was like, okay, now that's what he looks like. And I wish that I could remember what he looked like in my head before.
Yeah, and I think of popular games. I mean, Skyrim's been going on forever, right? But there's a certain amount of choose your own adventure in that, right? And I love that, and Fallout, where you're actually creating and forming your character by the way you answer questions, right? So I think that's a fascinating way, and that's why people can play these games again and again on all the different devices, because you are molding that story around what you want to do and how sort of intelligent or how strong you want your character to be. So yeah, it's great.
I love it. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left until the end of our time slot today. So I want to kind of dive into a little bit more of like the tips from somebody who does this storytelling every day. So like sales is all about like you got to tell a story, you got to convince somebody to literally pay money for something. So in terms of somebody that does tell that story and gets somebody to buy into something, especially if it's a technical piece, what are kind of some of your top tips that some of our digital storytellers might be able to integrate within the kind of the games, the digital stories that they're creating to really engage those users, those readers?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have to think about that. I think the biggest thing, and it kind of nicely ties in with pretty much everything I've talked about, is about audience and thinking about your audience, and not just kind of imagining sort of you saying, well, somebody will look at this game or somebody will view this content or whatever. You actually thinking about the actual person who will sit down and what they think about it, and then kind of considering it from that angle. So as I'm writing or as I'm creating a demo or presenting something, I think about, is there something I'm missing? Is there something that this person is going to basically wish I wasn't talking right now and wish they could ask me? And my second tip kind of relating to that would be to get as much feedback as you can, and don't be too scared about feedback, even if it is maybe constructively negative. Like if there's things that you should cut, maybe you should cut them. You probably want to keep stuff for yourself. If there's stuff that you don't want to share and you don't want to get feedback on, that's perfectly fine. But if you're building for an audience, you should be working with your audience and coming up with a content that they want to, the C word is a bit funny, but it is basically content that you want them to be reading and want to have a relationship with these people. So I think getting feedback often and talking to people who are your target audience is a good thing to do.
And it's so funny you say, man, we couldn't have planned this conversation better. So this week is actually the first play testing for
nice.
some of the stories. So on Thursday, our digital storytellers are actually going to be publishing the first draft, I guess, of their story to get some people to provide feedback. So this is just like very, very, very apropos of you saying you need to get customer feedback, you need to get reader feedback. So that's definitely a big piece of this.
Yeah. As I was saying with my code, I'm kind of holding myself back by not sharing it. I think people would see it and be like, oh, you could do this, you'd save so much time. And that's my problem, right? So yeah, the feedback is really important, and you have to get yourself in that frame ready for it.
So, and I guess maybe on that line then, talking about feedback. So, I mean, in sales, I certainly have heard, and I think it's a big reason I don't want to go into sales ever, is just like, I can't handle negative feedback. And when people are critical of like what you're trying to say, how do you turn that critical kind of feedback, or maybe not critical feedback, into something that's actually helpful for you to kind of improve on the next sale or to improve on the next iteration of what you're doing?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to that. Firstly, I've only really worked for companies where I feel very strongly that the product or the service is very good. And so if you find a role where you're comfortable and you're happy about the company and what they're doing, I think a lot of it comes naturally, because it's not really about whether you're good enough. It's about whether it's a good fit for your potential customer, right? So, and if you're confident in that and you feel like you've used the software or the product and you feel like it's good, then there's very little. I heard something once where they said, if you tell people why you work for a company and why you think it's good, there's very little people can say about that, because it's your decision that you made, and maybe they disagree, but they can't face to face tell you that you're wrong, right? So I think that's an interesting thing to bear in mind. And I can't remember what my second point was. I think it was probably rolled into there as well. But in terms of being aware of people's feedback and just knowing sometimes you're working with them and maybe it's not a good fit, and that's okay. There'll be other people, and as long as you're upfront and don't do any weird sales tactics, you're probably going to be all right.
I love it. So we got about a minute left, and I want to throw to the chat because I know there's a bit of lag. If you got any kind of last burning questions for Christian, now's the time. Get them over in the chat because now's the time to ask them. But while they're kind of throwing those last questions in there, if they have them, Christian, if any of our digital storytellers are looking to find out more about you, or if they want to find your blog, where can they go to find that?
Yeah, I guess the Source Target newsletter has a good site. It's sourcetarget.email, so it's easy to remember. And then my personal site is my initial cjlm.ca. But I'm on Twitter and all those places, so I'm sure we could link those as well. But yeah, I'm just a guy just doing stuff. So yeah, feel free to email me, and if you have any questions about 11T or using anything in terms of storytelling, just drop me a line.
Awesome. And I've just thrown into the chat there. Christian's website, cjlm.ca, the website for sourcetarget.email. I will also, if you're going to catch this on the CodeWords classroom or space for digital storytelling, I'm going to post those links there as well. Christian is around, so he's available to kind of help if you want some feedback. If you have some questions, you can definitely shoot them to me. I'll make sure they get to Christian, but also if you Google Christian Miles and technical sales lead, you can find him on LinkedIn too. So tons of ways to get in touch with Christian if you got questions that come to you after the stream.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, and look out online. There's a Christian Miles who's a football or a soccer commentator. So that's not me.
Amazing. So Christian, I always like to give guests on these Q&A corners kind of the last like 10-second spiel. And it's always on the same question. So if you had a single piece of advice for a student, particularly one who's really into storytelling and reading, that's into kind of that kind of world of content creation, that is interested in getting into the world of tech, what would that best advice be?
I think, going back to what I was saying earlier about creating a website, I think it's a very low, it's a very low barrier to get a website up there with your thoughts and your feelings about things. So I would say that is a really good way to kind of get the experience of building a product, even if it is just your own website, but getting yourself out there with somebody with your thoughts and feelings and your log of what you're doing. I think when you're looking to maybe get a job or talk to people, it's nice to be able to link them to things and show that you're a real person in the real world. We were talking earlier about how the internet can kind of obfuscate or hide where people are not real, right? But if you have a website where you're talking about what you've been doing, what you've been up to, maybe some photos and some links for you, I think it's a really good way to kind of start creating content and have a place for that and not worry about websites and worry about is Medium going to be around forever, or is my blog on WordPress going to be around forever? Owning it and just kind of starting that journey so that 14 years from now you'll look back and you say, wow, I've been writing for 14 years.
Love it. Super practical tip. So get out there, build a website. If you're not sure how, that's what we're here for. That's what High Tech U is here for. So we're always here to help. So Christian, thank you so much again for being our guest here on this very special Q&A corner. It's been a while since we did one, so I'm so excited that it was with you. To all of our viewers that caught this live on Twitch, thank you so much for being here. To all of our CodeWords digital storytellers, I hope this has been helpful in your digital storytelling adventure at CodeWords. And if you're catching this on YouTube later and you want to learn more about what this whole thing is all about, you can go to hightechu.ca and there's information about CodeWords. There's information about all of our other programs that we have out there. So hightechu.ca, I'll do the classic thing you do, like, subscribe, pound that subscribe button, that right down there. And we hope to see you if you're in CodeWords, around the CodeWords community, and we hope to see you if you are just out there in the world, that we hope to see you around the High Tech U community. Thanks everybody for being here, and we'll see you next time here on Q&A Corner presented by High Tech U. Bye.
Bye.